Coming up, America's changing relationship with Asia.
Clearly, American leaders and policymakers must stop traveling across the Atlantic and start traveling across the Pacific.
Former Singaporean Ambassador Kishore Mahbubani gives a candid talk on the state of Asian-American relations. It's just ahead on Global Ethics Forum.
When it came time to identify the individual who would best represent how Asians view Americans, we knew that we needed to have someone who would be candid in their analysis and forthright in telling America about how we should engage with this part of the world. There was no hesitation, as there was only one name that came to mind. As you've guessed, Kishore Mahbubani was the one.
As you know, in America, when you begin speaking, you always have to begin with a joke. And I'm sorry, I don't have a joke. But in Asia, we always begin with an apology. And I'm actually going to begin with a very genuine apology to all of you, because I fear that, I'm glad you warned them that I can be very open and candid in my remarks, but I suspect that even after you said that, you may feel somewhat uncomfortable when you hear some of the things I'm going to say. So I'm going to apologize to you in advance for any discomfort you may feel about what I'm going to say to you. But at the same time, if I don't make you uncomfortable with my remarks, then I'm failing in my job, because the world that is coming is a world that is outside your comfort zones. And you got to prepare for this world that is coming, that is outside your comfort zones. And what I can do as a friend of all of you is to, in a sense, give you hints of what that world is going to be like as it comes faster and faster towards you. So let me begin with the perceptions. And of course, in the perceptions, you have the good, the bad, and then you have not so much the ugly, but a combination of the ugly and the beautiful. And as I explained, the ugly and the beautiful sometimes go hand in hand in the perceptions. So on the good side, I want to say that, number one, I would say the one thing about America that clearly excites Asians, especially young Asians, is your universities. And if you talk to young Asians and about their dreams of where they want to go and study, which universities they want to go to, clearly top of the list are American universities. And I can tell you that one of the best things that America has done is to basically educate the next generation of Asians. And I don't know how many of you keep track of the numbers that they're growing exponentially. The Chinese used to send 60, 70,000. Now there are about 160,000 Chinese students studying in American universities, the 110,000 Indian students, and 70 to 80,000 Korean students. So you get a sense of the numbers that are coming. So it's going to grow, by the way. Huh? Then, of course, the second thing that the Asians admire a lot is your spirit of enterprise. You know, I mean, it's quite amazing how America is the only country where you can have these huge success stories emerge out of nowhere. You know, I mean, whether it's a Microsoft or a Google or a Facebook, it's still a mystery. Why is it no other country has been able to achieve anything like what the United States has been doing in this area? Another area where clearly America is highly regarded is that this is the one place where you can come to as a foreigner and come here and study and then end up as a CEO of a major company. Very few countries are as open as America is, you know. I mean, if you look at Indra Nooyi, how she came here as an MBA student, became CEO of PepsiCo. You look at Vikram Pandit, how he became head of Citibank. Then from Klaus Kleinfeld, CEO of Elco, Mutaken from Coca-Cola from Turkey. So it's an amazing story. And so this clearly inspires other countries. And they always say, yeah, I want to, you know, try and make it in America. So these are the positive aspects of America. But I now have to switch to the uncomfortable part about the negative. And here I have to emphasize one thing. There was clearly a point in time when America was perceived purely as a land of milk and honey, where everything was wonderful. That impression of milk and honey is gone. And in fact, people have a much more nuanced and sophisticated view of what's right and what's wrong with America. So if I had to point to the three bad, in a sense, negative perceptions of America, the first word I'm going to use is clearly a very uncomfortable word, but it's a word that has changed America's perception dramatically around the world, and that word is torture. And I can tell you that when United States became the first modern civilized nation to reintroduce torture, it had an amazing impact around the world. Because everyone said, hey, this is the country that was the moral beacon. This is the country that used to lecture us, write reports on our human rights situation. And look at it. Now they're introducing torture. And I can tell you, many Chinese intellectuals said to me in private, no, in the past, even when the Chinese used to disagree with America publicly, they would say, okay, I have to disagree with you publicly, but in my heart, I agree, you are right. We're not as good as you are. But they said, after you brought into Guantanamo and torture, they said, excuse me, we are no different now. Don't lecture us anymore. And I can tell you that the reason I emphasize is that every year still, the State Department produces human rights reports on the rest of the world, which used to be taken very seriously. But now everyone says, hey, please do a human rights report on America first, and judge yourself and then judge us. And that has made a dramatic impact in terms of perceptions of America. The second negative area is what I call the perceived American antipathy to the Islamic world. Here, I really think the United States should work very, very hard at trying to address how it is perceived in the Islamic world. Because it is not healthy, this growing sense of antipathy towards you. And of course, I'm by the way, I'm acutely aware how difficult the situation is. It's not easy to resolve. But I always say that there is fortunately, one silver bullet that is available. And that one small silver bullet that's available is a two-state solution on Israel and Palestine. And to understand why that is important, why the Palestinian issue is so important to 1.3 billion Muslims, they feel a very deep sense of humiliation. And with this sense of humiliation, they see, hey, there are 3 to 4 million Palestinians who are in deep trouble, and we cannot help them. We are helpless. And that's why they feel this deep antipathy over this issue. And the third negative is what I call the ignorance of the impact of American power. Because America still is the number one superpower of the world. And so whatever you do, even for domestic reasons, has remarkable impact on the rest of the world. So whether it's your subsidies, right? If you have corn subsidies and you convert corn to ethanol, it leads to hunger in other places. When you embark on QE1 and QE2 and QE3 and you pump in the money supply, it does cause inflation in the rest of the world. Right? We live in a one world. So this is an example of what you do has an impact on the rest of the world. But most Americans are not aware that the actions you take domestically spill over and affect the rest of the world. And at some point, the world is saying, pay attention to the impact that you have on us. In the past, when you had 7 billion people living in 193 separate countries, it was like living in 193 separate boats. So you had rules to make sure the boats didn't collide. Today, the 7 billion people in the world no longer live in 193 separate boats. They live in 193 separate cabins on the same boat, but with no captain or crew to take care of the boat as a whole. You have captains and crews taking care of each cabin. And the reason why I use that metaphor is that sometimes, and I extend that metaphor a bit, when America is busy cleaning its own cabin, the dirty water from his cabin goes into the other cabins and is not aware that it's affecting the rest of the world. And that's why you've got to be, in a sense, conscious of how the world has changed. Now, let me also now go on to the other area where I say there's a combination of ugly and beautiful, about where some aspects of your society can be both positive and negative at the same time. The positive dimension, number one, on this in the field of money, is how philanthropic you are. I mean, America is the most generous society in the world. The amount of money you give to philanthropy is absolutely astounding, you know. And now that you have people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett agreeing to do what they call the giving pledge, to give away most of their money in their lifetime, that's a remarkable thing to do, you know. And recently I was with David Rubenstein in Singapore. He was speaking at the Singapore Global Summit, and he was saying that he's been trying to persuade Asian philanthropists to do the same, you know, to promise to give away most of their money. He hasn't succeeded. So clearly Asian philanthropists are not as generous as American philanthropists, and so you are clearly ahead down there. But at the same time, while that aspect of money in America is very positive, on the other hand, the role of money in politics here is incredibly negative. How you allow people to use unlimited sums of money to push all kinds of causes means that at the end of the day, in a democracy, you're more or less supposed to create a level playing field where each man's vote has equal impact. In theory, it does. But when money comes into the picture and you throw these incredible amounts of money, it distorts the whole processes of democracy. And so many countries actually try to think of ways and means of not doing what the United States is doing in the field of money politics. So in that sense, you become a negative example. Then in the area of rule of law, I mean, clearly America is number one domestically in terms of rule of law. And if you want to always look for a society that respects, promotes the rule of law in the world, number one is America. And that's also why, by the way, people come here, bring their money here, invest here, carry out research here, because they have confidence in the rule of law. But the paradox here is that while America is number one in adhering to the rule of law domestically, America is also number one in violating international law. And that's a paradox, you know. Why is it a society that promotes the rule of law at home violates it outside and refuses to accept the ICJ judgments, refuses to ratify the ICC? In fact, America doesn't ratify even the Children's Convention, the Law of the Sea Treaty, and many treaties where hundreds over countries have ratified. America is often the exception. Why? Why is America doing this? This creates a sense of incredulity. I mean, are you really insulting us? I mean, you think we can't see this? This creates an embarrassment when America tries to take the moral high ground in many areas of international law, especially when it is so far behind the rest of the world. That's another paradox. Then thirdly, the last area is, of course, the one area in which obviously America is very strong is that in terms of freedom of expression, freedom of press, you're number one in the world, of course. You have the world's freest press, and clearly you can say anything and do anything you want in America, and you enjoy a very unique freedom here. But the paradox here is that on the one hand, while you have the greatest freedom of expression, you also seem to have the greatest freedom to remain ignorant. Because the free press in America has not succeeded in creating a well-educated citizenry and telling them that the world has changed. The press here is so amazingly insular. And if you come here, you can sometimes feel cut off from the rest of the world. I mean, to give you a very simple example, right? You know that, take three icons of America: CNN, Time, and Newsweek. Do you know that the CNN International Edition, which is not shown in America, is completely different from the CNN domestic edition? And I sometimes wish that one day they would just switch. Take the international edition and broadcast it to the homes in America, and take the domestic edition and broadcast it to the rest of the world. And then you begin to see the gap. And if you look at Time in Newsweek, the local editions and the international editions, again, they're very different. It's almost as though they don't want to tell American people what's going on here. Let me quickly rush through the attitudes towards America. And here, very quickly, I want to divide Asia into different segments, okay? And let me just talk about three big pools of Asia: China, India, and ASEAN. And in China, by the way, it's important for you to understand that not just among the Chinese Communist Party, among the Chinese establishment, there is, while of course they admire what America has accomplished, there's deep suspicion of America in China. The Chinese believe that in one way or another, America is trying to stop China from succeeding. But despite their suspicion, they want to work with America. India clearly is much more positive towards America and its attitudes. And if you go to India, Americans will find a much more open, welcoming environment. But even so, the Indian foreign policy establishment does not want to become an American ally. It does not want to be used as a tool of American foreign policy. It wants to be friendly, but independent in its own right. And clearly, the one region in the world that probably is the most positive in Asia towards America is the ASEAN region. Now, many of you probably have not paid much attention to ASEAN, but ASEAN is a modern miracle. You know, the ASEAN is an association of Southeast Asian nations, 10 countries, 600 million people, the second most successful form of regional cooperation after the European Union. But what's more remarkable is that the European Union still remains today a Christian club, but the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, among 600 million people, has got 250 million Muslims, 80 million Christians, 120 million Buddhists, and communists, and Confucianists, and Taoists. It's the most diverse regional organization anywhere in the world. And this remarkable model of regional cooperation is one where there's a lot of pro-American attitudes exist down there, but most Americans are not aware that there's a reservoir of goodwill towards America in ASEAN. So my final recommendations, therefore, quite simply to build on what I say, are 3 points. One is clearly American leaders and policymakers must stop traveling across the Atlantic and start traveling across the Pacific. I mean, if you look at the schedules of American leaders and how they schedule the president's time or the time of the Secretary of State and others, there's an inherent bias towards the Atlantic. And sometimes I say very unkindly, if you want to see the past, go to Europe. If you want to see the future, come to Asia. But American policymakers are still inclined to go towards Europe and don't travel often enough to Asia to understand that there's a new world emerging out there. And the only way you learn is to go out there. And secondly, for American business, there are incredible opportunities out there in Asia. Incredible. Let me just give you one small figure. The size of the middle class in Asia today, 2012, is 500 million people, right? Not a small sum, reasonable sum. By 2020, the figure is going to grow from 500 million to 1.75 billion people. This creates tremendous opportunities out there in Asia. And my third and final recommendation, especially to young Americans, is the only way to understand other languages and other cultures is to learn their languages. So I would say if you can persuade young Americans to become bilingual and choose one Asian language, it could be Vietnamese, Mandarin, or Hindi, or Urdu, or Bahasa Indonesia. There's so many languages out there. Encourage Americans to become bilingual. Because one of the most stunning statistics about America is probably one of the most monolingual countries in the whole world in terms of its capacity to understand other languages and dialects. And this, I believe, has got to change. So with that, thank you very much.
how should America, in your opinion, in the sophisticated Asian view, have reacted to 9/11?
The second biggest attack after 9/11 actually was supposed to happen in Singapore. Singapore actually prevented a group that was about to accumulate, several huge amounts of fertilizer, explosives, and blow up installations used by Americans in Singapore, including the American Club and so on and so forth. So we caught them. And we could have done exactly what the United States had done, which is to torture them and say, give us all the information. But all the studies show that torture doesn't work. When somebody is tortured, he or she will tell you anything you want to hear. So what we did was that we got imams to speak to these people. And the imams persuaded them that their cause was wrong, that their cause was anti-Islamic. And surprisingly, it worked. And you know what? Some of these people who were actually going to detonate this huge amount of explosives have now been released and are free. So in Singapore, by the way, we have 15% of our population is Muslim in Singapore. And we are surrounded by more Muslims than Israel is. Because if you add up the population of Indonesia and Malaysia, it's larger than the Arab world. And so we have to have a very deep and sensitive understanding of how the Islamic world works.
Rita Hauser, International Peace Institute. Kishore, a number of years ago, I had the pleasure of being at your institute where we heard Lee Kuan Yew. And at the end of his lecture, he said, in answer to a question, everybody here in Asia knows who the big gorilla is. There's no doubt about it. It's China. How does the rest of Asia see China, which has got to figure into how they also see America?
The world's most important geopolitical relationship has always been the world's greatest power and the world's greatest emerging power. The world's greatest power is the United States, the world's greatest emerging power is China. And in the case of China, it is possible that China may emerge as an angry dragon and go out and flex its muscles and conquer the rest of the world or whatever, But I don't think that's going to happen. China will become more powerful. China will flex its muscles. All great powers do so. There's no such thing as a benign great power. But at the same time, the Chinese preoccupation for at least the next 20, 30 years is internal. They have huge domestic problems. The Communist Party gains its legitimacy from delivering a better standard of living to its people. That's the priority. And getting involved in wars, getting involved in any kind of conflicts will kill their domestic development. So I actually believe that the Chinese will, in the words of Robert Zalek, emerge as a responsible stakeholder in the global system and not be a sort of wild dragon when they emerge.
You're sitting in Singapore and you're having a view of the United States as sort of a wild rogue elephant, if you will. What are the circumstances which you would agree that an intervention overseas would be justified?
Please go and re-examine what geopolitical mistakes you have made in the past. Because America, unfortunately, has been geopolitically incompetent. Where there was no necessity for you to start a fight, you started one. And your invasion of Iraq was a huge geopolitical gift to China. And believe me, if you bomb Iran, the champagne bottles will open in Beijing. And they say we'll have 20 years of peace in China because America gets sucked into another unnecessary war. So remember that there are battles you need not have fought and that you could have taken care of your own interests better. I'm not saying it from my point of view. I'm saying from the point of view, your national interests, what you did defeated your own national interests. And in the future, you cannot, believe me, you cannot save Afghanistan. Russia tried and failed. The British tried and failed. At the end of the day, the Afghans will have to solve Afghanistan. And you have to find Afghans you can work with. Don't believe you can save the world. At the end of the day, the good news for all of you is that the rest of the world is actually becoming remarkably intelligent. And most countries, the vast majority of them, are now doing a better job at managing their own affairs than any other countries can. Do not believe that if America decides to stop humanitarian intervention, the world is going to fall apart. That at the end of the day, remember there are 7 billion people in the world, 300 million in America, less than 5%. You cannot carry the world on your shoulders. But the remarkable thing is that what you do, for example, the hundreds of thousands of Asians that you teach and educate in American universities, these are the people creating the new world. And it's the university education you give to them is far more powerful than your military that you send outside. So use your education, use your culture as a weapon.
Thank you very much for giving us such a wonderful discussion.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.